Hey there, I'm Rye Myers, your Broadway and Entertainment BFF, and you're watching Live with Rye. I'm so thrilled you are tuning in. Thank you again so much. Hey, listen, before we begin, I have a huge favor to ask of you. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you never miss an episode of Live with Rye. You're doing me a huge favor by subscribing, but you also will never miss an episode of Live with Rye. You'll see anytime I post any of my other content. So hit that subscribe button below. And hey, also do me a favor too. I love being able to bring you some of the most exclusive interviews with some of the best people in the entertainment, Broadway, and pop culture world, but I can't do it without your help. So if you are so inclined and able, go to ridethenewsguy.com/donate, which you'll also see scrolling across the bottom of your screen as well. Or you can click this nifty little QR code if you're watching from a laptop or computer and scan it, and that'll take you to the donation page as well. And you can make a donation of any amount if you are so inclined. It means the world to me. Your support allows me to be able to run the show and this platform, and it means so much. And as you will see, I'm coming at you from a different location as well today. So everything's exciting and just changed for this week. But with that, let me welcome my very special guest. I'm super excited to talk to this person. Help me welcome the incredible author, Eddie Shapiro. Hey, Eddie.
Hi, Rye. How are ya?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I am swell. I'm in Los Angeles. It's sunny and warm. What could be wrong with the world?
Oh, well, nothing. I'm happy to say it's sunny. Well, it's not sunny, but it's warm here in New York. Usually it's cold and dreary, so that's wonderful. Yeah, well, I certainly wish the sun was out here for sure. So
Summer. You'll get it. You'll get some sun.
Yeah, well, we've had a lot, but I always hate when it rains. But let's get started. So how did you get into writing and becoming an author? Sort of take me back to the beginning. Where was that?
I don't know that you want to go back that far. But the short version is I got into writing because I was in charge of the AIDS Walk in both New York and Los Angeles, and I found that job all consuming. And because I felt like it was swallowing me, I was kind of looking for a creative outlet for myself, just something that had deadlines to it to make me do it, just so that I would be forced to do things other than work. So I started writing reviews for Backstage magazine or newspaper. And then that quickly led to features, and then that led to books. So yeah, that's the short version.
Wow. Well, that's really exciting. And fast forward to now, you've just released your most recent book, A Wonderful Guy. After releasing your first book, Nothing Like a Dame. Here's the cover of A Wonderful Guy, a very great cover. Where did the inspiration come from to write these books about some of Broadway's leading ladies and men?
Well, actually, prior to my Broadway books, I wrote a book on the Gay and Lesbian Guide to the Disney theme parks. And before that, I worked on one on casting directors. So it's sort of, it's wherever my mind is in the moment that I'm sort of, but the Broadway books happen. I've been obsessed with Broadway my entire life since I was a very small person, I'm sure, like you.
Yes.
And listening to cast albums and memorizing them from the time I was 5 and 6 years old and all of that. But the idea to do these books happened actually because I was a devotee of Barbara Cook. And Barbara Cook in her concerts, if you ever saw one, you're awfully young, Rye, so I don't know that you ever saw Barbara Cook live.
Yeah.
But in her concert, she would always talk about being in the room where it happened. When you're in the golden age of musicals, she would talk about working directly with Richard Rodgers or Leonard Bernstein or Stephen Sondheim, about being in the rooms with these people. And she would have these amazing stories. And I thought to myself, well, gee, Barbara Cook is getting up there in years, and these stories aren't going to be around forever. And it seems like somebody should take responsibility for capturing these stories. So I wrote her a quite impassioned letter saying, wouldn't you like to collaborate on your autobiography? And I got back a very lovely no. But I thought about it, and I thought, well, why stop at Barbara Cook? There are other stories, other people, other links to the history of musical theater. So I wrote to her again, and I said, well, what if you were just a chapter in a book that covered the great women? And she said, that I will do. So I was off to the races. And as it would happen, by the time that book, Nothing Like a Dame, came out, actually I should say this book, Nothing Like a Dame, came out, she had decided to write her own autobiography. So she asked me not to include her chapter. So that great Barbara Cook chapter has yet to see the light of day. However, there was a third book on Broadway in the works, and I will be including it the next time around.
Wow. Oh, well, that's exciting. Well, we're going to get to that later and what you have in the works. That's really exciting. Who was in this Wonderful Guy book? Who was your favorite leading man to talk to?
Oh, an impossible question. Always Sophie's Choice. There are I have different favorites for different reasons. And also, just like all of us, some of us are better conversationalists one day than we are the next because of what we ate that morning or how good the coffee was or if the moon is in Mercury or whatever. But my experience in talking to these men for these chapters, I really enjoyed all of them, truly. However, for different reasons, John Cullum was an incredible raconteur. He had all kinds of detailed stories that are the kinds of things like when you read Moss Hart's Act One, they're just sort of stories of another age that were fascinating to me. So I love talking to him. Raul Esparza is so willing to be vulnerable and to show his insecurity, and he's well aware of what makes him great, but also show his insecurity. And that I found really honest and true. And I love that. And Christian Borle and Michael Cerverus are both so incredibly thoughtful and intelligent. And I really, really loved diving into topics with both of them that sometimes diverged from their careers. And we were just talking about the business in general. And Norm Lewis has been a friend of mine for a zillion years. So just sitting down with Norm is always a delight. So, and now I feel bad about the ones that I didn't mention, but I mean, really, for different reasons, I feel thrilled and privileged and honored to being able to talk to all 19 of them, and all of them, bar none, gave me so much time. They were willing to sit. I mean, some of these conversations would go for 9 and 10 hours, and they were willing to sit and indulge me for hours and hours and hours. I didn't even have to buy them, food. Well, sometimes I did actually. For Mark Kudish, I cooked breakfast, but.
Well, that is, and Mark Kudish's chapter is very interesting. I was, I found it interesting. He was talking a little bit about when they're talking about the audience, he's sort of how he not a know-it-all, but he's sort of full of himself or something. Or there's a part where he's talking about when you're talking about Beauty and the Beast, and I just found it interesting that he said he doesn't, not that he didn't care, but his way of going about sort of the role I found was very interesting. Again, I'm still working my way in the beginning, but I went through some chapters to sort of touch on it for this. But he's a really interesting character.
Kudish is, and he goes by Kudish a lot. Kudish is, and I love this about him. He comes on. He's really opinionated, and he loves a debate, and he loves a strong conversation. And you have to be, I think, in order to converse with him well, the kind of person who is also strong in your own convictions. But if you misunderstand him, he might come off like a bully. He's not, because he's the first person who will change his mind and say, "Oh, you're right," But he comes on really strong. It's fascinating.
That is fascinating. So what was the process like in sitting down with these men? Did you do it in person? Did you know them? Was it just connections through other men that you talked to that led you to these guys? And how did you narrow it down to, the ones you put in the book?
Well, that's a whole, so let me see if I can get all of those questions. All of them were in person. That's a rule I have, that I will only do this in person, because I think that there is something if you look at the book, what I'm going for, it's up to you to decide whether or not I achieve it. But what I'm going for is really honest, intimate conversations. And I don't think you can get that on the phone. And when I wrote this book, Zoom wasn't a thing. We weren't doing Zoom meetings yet. The last interview for this book was on March 7th of 2020. So just before lockdown. So I was lucky enough to get in under the wire. But I think being in the room with somebody is somewhat essential. How did I get to these guys? It varied. Some of them, like I already told you, Norm Lewis was a friend for a long time. So Norm's easy. And sometimes it would be like, hey, Norm, can you do me a favor? Can you reach out to X person and see if they're interested in this? And in some cases, some of these people had read Nothing Like a Dame. Joel Grey had read Nothing Like a Dame already and was, so therefore happy to participate. It varies. And sometimes there was a courtship. I mean, and which I didn't always win, by the way. I mean, I would leave cookies, I would leave cupcakes, whatever bribery I could get away with in order to say, hey. But the good news on this book that was easier than the first one is that Nothing Like a Dame existed. So if anybody sort of was curious about what they might be getting involved in, they had a reference point. Whereas when I was starting with Nothing Like a Dame, who is this guy and what does he want from me? So, there's that. And then your question was, how did I choose who to include? And that, my friend Rye, was a process. And I mean, it always is, because the goal in this book and the one before it was to have career encompassing conversations. So I wanted long chapters. I wanted for a reader to feel like nothing was left on the table. We covered from when did the theater bug bite you to the most recent show that they did, and everything in between, at least their stage work. So knowing that the chapters were going to run long, that meant that I had to cull the list to fit the publisher's word count. So I had to limit it. In the case of the women, I limited it to Tony Award winners. That was a big one. And then they had to have, and this was true of both books, they had to have a full career in musical theater. So for example, there are artists who I adore. Hugh Jackman, Alan Cumming, Ben Platt, Billy Porter, who have done a few musicals, but who don't have a full career of musical theaters works. They've done, in fact, in the case of Hugh Jackman, his career is predominantly elsewhere. So it was about people who are career musical theater performers. Mm-hmm. And some of those actually, I mean, in this new book, one could quibble because Len Cariou has certainly done as much television and straight plays as he's done musical theater, but he still had a through line of musical theater throughout his whole career. Same with Angela Lansbury, who's obviously done tons of other things, but 4-time Tony Award winner for musicals. She's done musicals throughout her whole career. So that was the criteria. And then of course they had to say yes. And as I already told you, not everybody did.
Right.
Those cupcakes and cookies weren't always as effective as I wanted them to be. So
darn it. Well, at least you had a reference for this time around for this one, You spoke to, some great people. And again, I was just, when I got the copy, I just was like salivating because it was so exciting to read these, men's careers. And, a lot I didn't know either, talking about vulnerability, which I started to read a little bit of the Glenn Close, Gavin Creel chapter, and his vulnerability about talking about Mormon and a Book of Mormon and sort of the toll it took on him as a performer, how it almost made him quit the business, but also how it put a lot of stress on his voice and everything in between. After he left Millie into doing, I forget the show that it was, into Hair, and I love that they got very vulnerable and showed their true selves.
There's actually a lot of information in there. You bring up vocal injury. There's a lot of information in this book about both vocal injuries and physical injuries and the toll that it takes doing this work. And as an audience member, when you go see a performance, you are largely unaware of what they're struggling through in order to give you that performance, which is, of course, as it should be. They're professionals, but hearing the other side of it and hearing that toll, hearing Gavin Creel, who at 40 years old talks about how, he now on stage feels his age and has changed. He used to be somebody who would go to the gym for, as he put it, glamour guns, and is now all about core and stretching and, so making sure that he's limber on stage. It's stuff that we don't think about, but it's their day-to-day reality.
Well, sort of on that, I mean, did you find that these leading men shared any of the same stories or experiences in their career? And, aside from, you mentioned about the injuries, did you notice that when you were going through, they sort of shared the same experiences or same stories that were sort of alike?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the loveliest pieces of feedback I got on the book was from Raul Esparza, who wrote to me after he read it. He said that he was up till 3 o'clock in the morning reading it. And then he emphasized 3 a.m., which was so sweet and flattering. But he said, but I felt like I was part of this community where I didn't know that Christian Borle felt that way or that Gavin felt this way. And that some of the words could have been coming from my mouth. Like I felt like so many of the experiences are interchangeable, and I didn't know other people necessarily felt that way, or for that matter, differently. He said, how Cheyenne Jackson approaches a role is so different from the way I do, and that was equally fascinating to read. But it's also fascinating to me anyway to ask them about individuals and compare notes about anybody who worked with Sondheim, we talk about Sondheim, or Patti LuPone, we talk about Patti LuPone, that kind of thing. But also several of them were in the same show together. So they have some overlap and some different experiences of working with Hal Prince or John Doyle or whomever the director was, or just the run of the show in general. So it's always interesting to me to hear another perspective on the same topic.
Wow, that is really cool, and that does sound really, really interesting. As I said, I'm making my way through it, and it's just so many good things. What is something you learned about one of your interview subjects that surprised you the most?
Oh dear God, that John Cullum has a memory like a steel trap. That's one. Christian Borle was really surprising to me because when I think of Christian Borle, I think of Peter and the Starcatcher. I think of Something Rotten. I think of that even Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I think of this little me at Encores, or Me and My Girl at Encores. His ability to be antic, and he has all of that. He has that devilish energy, but he is also so thoughtful and kind of quiet and super intelligent. It's like everybody who talks about Lucille Ball and how in person she wasn't especially funny. She's a businesswoman and she was really good at what she did, but that's not who she was as a human. And my preconceived notions of Christian were belied by the experience of meeting him, which isn't to say that he's not funny, witty, but he's not all over the place. He's not an explosion of energy. That was a surprise. And another one who surprised me, and I say this, I hope this doesn't come off as a negative in the book at all, but Len Cariou was perhaps my most difficult interview in this book. And the reason for that is because Len Cariou doesn't, he's not somebody who you'll say, so you did Applause next, with Lauren Bacall. And he says, yeah, that was fantastic. Why? And you have to keep sort of prying it out of him. And it's not because my experience of him anyway, I didn't feel like he was holding back. I just felt like he's somebody who doesn't necessarily live his life, to dwell on the details. He just sort of has a wash of the experience, and that was great. And what else do you want to know, kid? And and on we go. So it was a challenge, but also just interesting. I mean, like when I met with him after the book came out, and he was warm, couldn't have been lovelier. So it wasn't like he was not trusting me or something. He just wasn't full of word vomit. Yeah. It was interesting.
I bet that is really interesting. So how long did it take you to write the book? Sort of from the start and doing the interviews to sort of publish. How long did it take for this one?
A few years. Dame took longer, but that owes to a couple of reasons. One is because books, as you may know, don't pay your rent. So there were periods of time I produce events. So there are periods of time when I would just be not writing at all because I was working in order to make money, and then I could focus on the book again. But also, as I mentioned, some of these interviews would go on, and they weren't all in one session. So Norm Lewis is a great example. We did something like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different sessions, and it was over the course of years, because his schedule, Norm is traveling all the time.
Right.
I'm bi-coastal. So, and as I told you, I insist on these being in the room. So it's kind of like, okay, when are our schedules lining up? And sometimes I would be in New York and he's not there. Or
Yeah.
sometimes, so whatever. It was all about scheduling. And then you multiply it by 19 men, and you're trying to schedule all of them. And before you know it, you're in it for the long haul.
Yes. I bet that does sound like the long haul for sure. Hey, tell me, with Nothing Like a Dame, how who were some of the people that you spoke? Who were some of the ladies that you got to speak with? I haven't gotten a chance to read that, but if you don't have to say all of them, but you name like 2 or 3 that you got to speak with. You mentioned Angela Lansbury. Did you get to talk to like Audra or Patty or?
Yes, and yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was Nothing Like a Dame was well, both books. For a kid who grew up, as I'm sure you did, as poring over books like this and listening to cast albums, to then be Carol Channing's house guest or Patti LuPone's house guest, or having, dinner with Elaine Stritch. It's like, pinch me. I can't believe this is happening to me. But also, there are the starrier names that we just mentioned, but I was also really, really pleased in that book to be able to include people whose stories are told less often. So yes, there are the Christian Chenoweths and Idina Menzel's and Sutton Fosters in that book, but there are also people like Judy Kay and Deborah Monk and Karen Ziemba who aren't talked about quite as often, but have certainly been in, a dozen or more rehearsal rooms of major Broadway shows and have a lot to talk about.
Yes. No, they certainly do. Wow. Well, I can't wait. I definitely can't wait to read that book as well. So, and if you're watching, make sure you also read that as well. What did you learn about yourself from writing A Wonderful Guy, and even Nothing Like a Dame too? But what did you learn about yourself in this process?
One of the best things that I learned about myself was that I was going to learn things about myself, because particularly in that first book, that first time around, I really feel privileged to have walked away with some life lessons that I never saw coming. And there were many of them. There's one, in fact, there's a blog that Oxford, the publisher, asked me to write about my day at Disneyland with Carol Channing. And I wrote that story, which you can find online if you look up Eddie Shapiro, Carol Channing. But what I got out of that day, and the way it informs my thinking about aging, means so much to me. Or another really powerful statement that I carry with me all the time. I said to Cheetah Rivera, you're Cheetah Rivera. You're known first and foremost as a dancer. And when you get up and do your show now, your audiences, whether or not they have it at the front of their mind, they have an expectation of what it is that you're going to be delivering. And that's not exactly the thing that you're delivering now. Do you try to compensate for that? I wasn't saying, oh, you're too old to dance now. That's not what I meant. I just meant it's different than sort of what we've come to expect of her career in the past. And she said, well, I could spend a lot of time thinking about all the things that I can't do anymore, or I could think about all of the things that I can do, and there's still quite a lot of them. So I'm going to keep doing those, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And I thought, well, of course. And rather than dwell on, oh, I can't hit that note anymore, what can you deliver? Which is, of course, the lesson that Barbara Cook delivered throughout her career. When she stopped having those high soprano notes, she became an incredible interpretive storyteller through song, or those things, crossed over, but she grew in her song interpretation as her soprano diminished, so that she was delivering something completely different. And that's of course a huge, huge lesson. I also learned a lot, particularly from the first book, going into the second, about myself as a writer, that I had to remind myself, because I'm so excited to be talking to these people and to be in active conversation. I had to remind myself that I'm not the story. So I have to tell myself all the time to shut the hell up, because even though I have ideas or thoughts that I want to provoke them with, when I get into sort of, and I can listen to the audios from these interviews and hear it, that like, oh, that's a really fascinating conversation that we just had, but I just drove the whole thing. And nobody's reading this book to hear my driving it. They want to hear what these people have to say. So that was an important lesson to learn, which, by the way, right, you do very well. You've let me babble on.
It takes practice. I mean, as you know, it takes practice. It's something I still sometimes find that I have trouble with. I'm always worried about cutting someone off. But no, it does take a lot of practice, because you get going and then you're like, oh wait, you have a guest. You gotta they want to hear that person. So I get it.
Again, to remind myself, I'm not the story. I'm not, even if I have interesting ideas, that's not what the reader is looking for. The reader wants to hear them.
Right. That's wonderful. What great advice you took away. Do you have any other books on the horizon? So you mentioned earlier you were writing another Broadway book. Anything you can tell us about?
Yeah, I can, and I will.
Yeah,
I broke my own rule when the pandemic started. So I handed in the manuscript for A Wonderful Guy on June 1st, 2020. And then I sort of was like, well, we're all under lockdown. All these performers are at home. And there were multiple women who I didn't get around to the first time around, who I really wanted to. So I started another book, a follow-up book on women. And I'm halfway through now, and I've conducted all of those interviews thus far via Zoom. Although now that we're back to life, I think I'm going to do the rest of them live and in person. So I'm halfway through another book on women.
And what is that book called? Are you able to tell us?
I can. I'm calling it It Takes a Woman, because I was out of South Pacific titles. Bali High wasn't going to work for this, so I switched over to Hello Dolly.
Oh wow, I love it. Yes, it takes a woman, wonderful guy, nothing like a dame. It's so great, so great. Well, what did the musical theater kid inside of me just lights up with pure joy when I hear those references. So, what advice would you give to writers or future writers who want to write their own book or write their own research book on a topic they're really passionate about, or a person they're really passionate about? What would the advice you would give? What would be the advice you would give to them?
Well, I think it's inherent in your question, so I hope that this is not redundant, what you said. The reason I wrote these two books, and the reason I wrote about Disney, specifically the Gay and Lesbian Guide to the Disney Theme Parks, is because I found that, if you're going to devote yourself to something, anything, and you're going to pour yourself into it, it better be something that you love. It better figure out how you want to spend your time, figure out what you want to be surrounding yourself with, metaphorically speaking, what ideas, what thoughts, what genre you want to be immersing yourself in, and then go for that. Because if it's anything less than that, it might be something that's commercial, it might be something that's sellable, but it's not the company you're going to want to be in. Whereas in this, because I am so in love with the Broadway musical, to immerse myself in it, it's a pleasure every time I sit down to work, and every time I go through these stories, or listening to. Again, I told you these interviews are quite sprawling. So culling them and making them into something that's coherent and still has the voice of the performer is a labor of love, because I love what they're doing and saying so much. So my advice is, if you're going to go for it, make sure you love it.
Well, and you do it so well too, because transcribing audio to print, at least in my experience, is not the easiest. I mean, I've done some interviews in the past, and they call them phoners in the media industry, where people where, I would call them on the phone and I would record it and then would transfer it to the text. And not only is it a lot of writing, and even if you get it transcribed, but, you want to try to capture the tone of that person. And it's very hard to capture the tone, if maybe they don't speak in complete sentences, or they don't speak, like a sort of how it would be in writing. And writing is not my strong suit. And so I find it very wonderful and incredible. And it's something like you can take conversations and make them flow so simple, and the chime-ins that happen, and everything flows so great, and make the conversation translate. Conversational. So that's the text so well.
That is the goal. That is the goal every time. And the best compliment is when the subjects get back to me and say, after they've read it, "Oh, I sound like me. I recognize me." Or sometimes it's the spouse who has said that to me, or the assistant who said that to me. That sounds just like her. Then I feel like, okay, good. I did my job.
Amazing. Well, where can we pick up A Wonderful Guy and Nothing Like a Dame? Where are they available for us to purchase?
I like to say anywhere books are sold. However, books are sold in so few places these days. They're certainly on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com and in local bookstores. There's also, you can buy directly from the publisher at oup.com, Oxford University Press. And I do say everywhere books are sold, but I was down on Canal Street and there was a blanket full of books and they didn't have my book. So not everywhere books are sold.
Do you have it in the Drama Bookshop, the new Drama Bookshop?
I don't know, because I haven't been back to New York since it opened. I'm assuming.
I didn't see it. I went the second day. I didn't see it. So I would ask you.
Then please go back in there and yell at them. I certainly hope so. I did go for my very first bookstore visit yesterday. I went to Barnes and Noble at the Grove in Los Angeles, and I for a month it's been out, and I haven't gone and looked at the book, and I finally did, and they had it prominently displayed, so I wasn't disappointed.
That is wonderful. Well, yeah, you got to talk to your people, get it in the Drama Bookshop, because that's a lot of that's where now that it's new and open and sprawling, so many theater fans are going to love it, and so get it in there too. But that's great you got to experience that in Barnes and Noble. That must have been such a thrilling experience to go in there and see it for yourself.
It's satisfying. It's not exactly thrilling, isn't the word, because I'm not that guy, but it's satisfying because it feels like, oh right, okay, now people can find this thing. It's not just sort of hidden away.
Right, exactly. Well, Eddie, thank you so much. Where can we keep up with you, follow you?
The best, there's because I am a Luddite, and I stink at Instagram. I have an Instagram account, but I'm barely there, but I do have a Facebook page, but Nothing Like a Dame has a Facebook page, which has become the Nothing Like a Dame /Wonderful Guy Facebook page. So I regularly post book information there, including most recently pictures of some of the men with the book, and that kind of stuff. So that's probably the best spot.
Oh, amazing. Well, we'll have to keep up with you with that. And if you all want to keep up with me, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Rye_Myers. I'm also on Facebook /official Rye Myers. And as always, you can go to RyeTheNewsGuy.com to see all of my other content as well, including interviews from Live with Rye. Eddie, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. Loved getting to learn more about this book. And I hope everyone picks up Nothing Like a Dame or A Wonderful Guy and reads these exciting stories. I'm making my way through A Wonderful Guy right now, and it's thrilling for the soul, especially after this long pause of live theater that we have, to be able to read these stories and relive the experiences and just think about everything they talk about. It really feeds your soul. So go pick it up today.
Well, it is a pleasure, Rye. I'm very happy to be here, but also it's a particular pleasure. I've said a couple of times now that I grew up reading books like this. So, and I just, anytime something like this came out, I was so excited for it. So when somebody who is as young as I assume you are, is excited by musical theater this way, and then I feel like, so I'm contributing to the chain and I'm adding to the canon for the next generation. And I really feel the honor of that, and also the responsibility of that. So I'm glad.
Well, thank you so much, Eddie.
Thank you.